Thank you, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kathy Stark with Animal Advocates for Change, in case you've forgotten. Yeah, right. And Jerry Wheelis, my partner in crime, is going to tag team as we go through this. I first want to really thank the mayor for scheduling this work session. And we've come before the council many times over the last 2 years. And trying to give you information, trying to maybe plant some seeds for ideas as to how we handle this overpopulation of animals, and at the same time, look out for their welfare. We appreciate the opportunity today to discuss what we've come up with as enhancements to our current ordinance in hopes that we can work together, and we're working with the county, Mary Lou is here, and that we can work together and really come up with some steps forward so that the city of Las Cruces becomes a model in animal welfare, because right now we're lagging. So Animal Advocates for Change, these are our goals: improving animal welfare, reducing animal neglect and abuse and suffering, reduce the risk of bites, and our bite numbers are up. I watch the ASCMV board meeting every month. That's disturbing. Reduce complaints, educate the public and encourage them to increase their compliance with the ordinance as a whole, but especially with microchipping. I shouldn't say especially, that one just stands out to us. Over the 4th of July, a group of us have scanners, and we are monitoring social media, and we would run out and scan a dog or a cat and try and get them reunited, and the number of animals who either don't have a chip or have one that's not up to date, and then we have this animal who's terrified. So we want to increase compliance. And we want to really we have to get a handle on the numbers, population management, and you'll see later when I talk about it, there's no one way to do this. So, gosh, it's been years since I've been at this podium and know how to use this. So the current ordinance was adopted in August 21st, 2021. It took 4 years to basically get TNR into an ordinance, and that was the bulk of what was in that ordinance. I became involved with the TNR portion of it. Jerry was involved previous to that. We came before you shortly after it was passed to point out that there were several errors, contradictions within that document, and we started to talk about what some of those were. Also, that it's not based on best practice or evidence-based solutions to animal welfare. When I talk about contradictions and errors, we talked in the ordinance about permitted cat colonies, and then we go on and say you don't need a permit for a cat colony. In the definitions, we have a found pet report, which the shelter relies on in trying to reunite animals, but there's nowhere in the ordinance that says to a resident, you need to file this report so that the person who's looking for their animal knows that it's been found and where it is. The one that I gave Clint a very bad time on, we talk about the definition of a domesticated animal in the ordinance definitions. And it says that microchip and rabies are required for domesticated animals, but a domesticated animal includes those that are for human consumption. So I asked Clint, are we gonna start microchipping the hens that people have in their coops in their backyards? So we want to clean that up. We want to eliminate those contradictions, those errors, and then augment them. There are definitions that are not there. Dog fighting, bait animals. I had a lady contact me yesterday. She said, what do? I have a neighbor with 3-week-old puppies, and he's giving them away for bait. And we need to define what it is. There's also something you can help us with, and we have met with Mr. Macias, both Mr. Maciases at the county with Mary Lou. In the ordinance, it says that we want the city and county ordinance to match to the greatest extent possible, and no one's been able to explain to me why that is, or to us why that is. We're working towards that end. Right now, actually, when I compare the city ordinance to the county ordinance stacks up better than our ordinance in the city. And so we're trying to dovetail that, and if you can give us any direction on that. In the ordinance, it says that our legislative intent is to do all of these things: neglect, abandonment, minimize the number of animals euthanized, encourage responsible companion animal ownership, and the big one that jumps out to us all the time is population management, primarily through sterilization. When you look at the ordinance and you really break it down and read it, there's not much in there that says we're trying to do anything with population management primarily through sterilization. We have the TNR program in there, but that is really it, and we really want that to become a focus. And yes, it's going to take dollars, and we'll talk about that a little later. So what we've done, when we started off, we said, let's have a public meeting. Let's get people come in and tell us, what are your concerns regarding animals? What are the problems you're encountering? And so we did that, and the top concerns that came out of that meeting were a lack of accountability, and by that they meant, and they articulated this very well, if animal control has to come out and pick up my dog 4 times, there are no consequences for me. And our response to them was, well, I don't know, let's find out. So we did an IPR request with the court, and they were right. There are not consequences. Next concern was uncontrolled breeding and lack of funding to help people. And you've heard me say this many times. There's people out there, they're trying. They're trying really hard to do the right thing. It is not inexpensive to spay and neuter your dog or your cat. Stray and abandoned animals. Last week, 2 of the local rescues went out and rescued an emaciated dog that had been out around the farm and ranch museum for a long time, and that's a regular occurrence. Picking them up out of the desert. When I was at the ASCMV the other day, this lady came in and she was distressed, opened the back of her SUV, and you hear all this yap, 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 yap. And I said, can I come and see? And she said, yeah. I said, where'd you find them? She said, in the desert. I think there were 15 puppies in that bin. And so that's a concern. Their other concern was what they termed lack of enforcement, and this isn't a ding on Gino, but his staffing levels, when you look at his monthly reports and how many calls they're getting, I mean, it just blows you away. And then when they get there, the animal's gone. Doesn't surprise me, given the staffing level and just the sheer size of the city. Cruelty and neglect is a big one, and people wanting to know what they're supposed to do when they witness what they think is cruelty and or neglect. And then the other thing that residents have told us repeatedly is their sense is what they're told depends on which officer responds. And some of that, when I look at the ordinance, goes back to the ordinance. When we say appropriate housing, what does that mean? You know, Mayor Pro Tem, you may have one idea, I may have, I want the Hyatt Regency and I get the Motel 6. So those were those concerns that they expressed. Then what we did is we just dove in. We looked at best practices across the country. We reached out to national organizations. We got on the internet, we got on the phone and tried to look at, okay, what's working someplace else? Then we drafted the proposed ordinances and we got buy-in from the ASCMV and then several of our local rescues. We want to focus on care and control when we talk about animal welfare. We have identified at least some mechanism for funding for affordable spay and neuter and to try and address the overpopulation and the high euthanasia rates. And we've come to you repeatedly, and every time I stand up, I remember when Senator Papin was here not too long ago, and she was remembering Margaret Markham, because I told Mr. Enriquez a couple of years ago, I'm going to be channeling Margaret Markham. She was in my office frequently when I was with the city, and she just kept coming back and coming back and coming back, and that's me. We've met individually with a couple of you, and we provided the city with the draft ordinance. We also, because then we were told the policy analyst was going to start research. We said, hold on. Give us 2 weeks and we will summarize our research that we've done. So you don't have to recreate what we've just done. So we provided a 61-page document of the research summarization of what we've done. And then, as I told you at the last council meeting I was present, we have identified vets that are willing to help us. I think you're all aware that animal welfare is a public safety issue. Now, the SAGE publications came out with best practices in local animal control ordinances. And what they conclude is that inadequate ordinances lead to increased risks from dog bites, lawsuits from attacks, complaints about nuisance issues, improper care and lack of protection for animals, and not preventing animal suffering. With your backgrounds, you know there's a link between domestic violence, child abuse, and animal abuse. And the SAGE publication talks about that. So when we're talking about public safety, it's that direct public safety of those dog bites. It's also those other signs, and Gino alluded not too long ago about having completed a training about that connection and how we can work to recognize those situations and hopefully help those individuals out. So now I'll get into the meat and potatoes, unless you're a vegan, and then it'll be the celery and the eggplant. At the front of our recommendations, we've included a preamble which states a commitment to care and control, and it is largely right out of the Albuquerque Heart Ordinance. It's a commitment to recognizing the relationship between companion animals has changed. I hate to remember what my dad did with an injured dog to put it out of its misery. Last week there was another study that came out about the mental health and the physical health benefits of having a pet or 2 or 6 in your house. We want to recognize that in this ordinance. We want to help residents spay, neuter, vaccinate, and microchip. Prevention of attacks, prevention of cruelty, neglect, and asking the court, and you're hearing a lot about the court, whether it has to do with the vandalism that's going on, but asking the court to strictly enforce the ordinance. I think if you saw the results of the IPRA request we did, you'd be surprised. The definition section, what we tried to do is we added missing definitions: fighting, breeder, declawing, ear cropping, devocalization, neglect. But then we modified some to make it very clear what we mean when we're talking about domesticated animals, immediate control of that animal, abandonment, community cats. And we changed the way that we refer to pets and our role of interacting with those pets. And we changed that to guardians and caretakers. And someone said, well, wait a minute, pets are property. You can't use the word guardian. But actually, by definition, a guardian is a protector, defender, and keeper. There was just a recent study that how we use language repeatedly affects how we view the issue that we're talking about. And we wanted to start changing that mindset. Not that it's my dog and I can beat the daylights out of it whenever I want, or I can dump it because it's mine. We want to start ingraining that in the public. In general care and maintenance, and this is based on part of what we heard in our public meeting, but also in reading it, setting clear standards for what care and maintenance means. When we say an appropriate shelter, what is the minimum standards for that? That should also make it easier for animal control officers to understand those minimum standards and hopefully eliminate at least the perception that it depends which officer comes out. What constitutes inadequate shelter, cleanliness, hazards, and I already mentioned adequate. Now we get to the big stuff. Definitions are easy. And I will tell you, Jerry is the grammarian, so there were a lot of typos, missing commas. The who does what was missing, and so she wordsmithed all of that. When we talk about population management in this ordinance, this is what we're talking about. This is not about, I'm going to come to your house, or the city is going to come to your house and take your dog or your cat if it's not sterilized. We have intact animal permits. You don't want to spay neuter your animal. You're still governed by the care and control and restraint and microchipping and all of that, but you can purchase an intact animal permit. You can have a breeding permit. It allows us to, allows us to, how did I do that, Gino?
I think it's F3, isn't it?
Like, don't touch it. Thank,
5. Oh, I keep saying 3. Yeah.
if we have legitimate breeders, we want to know where they are. We need to monitor for inbreeding, improper care of those litters. We have a litter permit, and in the ordinance, what we're recommending is if you are intentionally or unintentionally, you've chosen not to spay neuter your animal, and you have a litter without a breeding permit, you buy a litter permit. It's not cost prohibitive, but you buy a litter permit. Again, we know where these people are. The community can be a big help, I think, to animal control, because we know where a lot of these people are. Then we have the spay neuter, and there are a myriad of ways to do required, mandatory. I know mandatory makes some people cringe. Spay neuter programs, but there is an exception to that also. If the animal is not healthy enough, you get a veterinarian to say it's not healthy enough. There's still an ongoing debate about when you should spay neuter large breed dogs so that they don't run into orthopedic. Veterinarian says this pup is too young. It's a large breed dog. And then they have an exception to this. We looked, and we continue. Yesterday, I'm looking again. When you look across the country, cities and counties over the last 15 years have moved to some kind of a required spay and neuter. Now, that may be a flat requirement like what we put in the ordinance. When I shoot for something, I shoot up here because I can always land here. It may be a fix it or ticket approach. It may be if your animal is impounded twice at the shelter, that animal needs to be spayed and neutered. And then there needs to be that help to get that done. When we talk about capacity, and I've talked about this before, everybody knows there's a vet shortage. But what we tried to do is we tried to think outside the box. We reached out to Hart, New Mexico. They're up in Los Lunas, and they do the shelter medicine for Los Lunas. And they showed up on my social media feed. We did 130 spay neuters this weekend. We handed out 30 vouchers this weekend. We reached out to them and said, what are you doing? How are you doing this? There's a vet shortage. And so they told us they're bringing in dual licensed vets from Colorado. A couple from Albuquerque helped them out. And then she said, and we're posting now for a full-time vet. I'm kind of, good luck with that. That was June. Last week she posted that she was posting for surgical tech and vet techs. So I reached out to her again. I said, did you get a vet? And she said, yes. I said, did they take the compensation you had on the table? She said, yes, $150,000 and para benefits, health insurance, etc. AAFC, with one of our members, she worked tirelessly, reached out to vets around the state and surrounding areas. We've identified 7 vets that are interested and available to help with spay-neuter clinics. We have 3 additional who said, we're interested, we'd like to know more. There are MASH providers, and by that I mean they come in with a mobile unit for like a weekend, and they just get it done. Doing 100 spay-neuters in a weekend is not unreasonable. They're all waiting for follow-up. That's outside of our arena to do follow-up for them. But the point is there's people, they're willing to help. We've asked before that you fund vouchers. The county funds the SNAP program, the city doesn't. We need to be able to help people. So I reached out to Michelle Corella, who is here today she's the director over at SNAP, and I said, if we could get a $100,000 mid-year budget adjustment, could you and your providers, using the average cost that they pay between dog and cats, handle 550 spay neuters by June 30th of 24? And she said, yes, they and their providers could do that. To the best of our knowledge, SNAP is the only organization that's equipped to do that. To move in the area of spay-neuter requirements in any shape or form, it's got to have funding. If it doesn't have funding, you can't go there. You just can't. This isn't about penalizing people, which is one of the biggest arguments against requiring spay and neuter. So we're gonna give them onerous penalties. That's not the goal. The goal is to try and get it done and get this population under control. And then, of course, it must include exclusions and alternatives, which I already talked about. So why are we saying mandatory, required, whatever word you want to use? If you look at your legislative intent of the ordinance, it says population management primarily through sterilization. Let's figure out a way to get it done. Spay-neuter helps eliminate a lot of nuisance behaviors, cats yowling, spraying, dogs barking, the mating activities in your backyard at 2 a.m. It reduces dogs straying. Well, most importantly, it doesn't add to the animal overpopulation, and they live longer, healthier lives. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. We had a Teams meeting with 2 representatives of Best Friends back in June, and we provided them with a copy of the working draft as it was at that point. 2 weeks ago, they reached out and we had another Teams meeting, and now we've had countless conversations and emails going back and forth. And I know that they have reached out to some of you with regards to effectiveness of requiring spay and neuter. We agree with the Best Friends and the ASPCA that the biggest barrier to spay and neuter is economic and lack of services. There's interconnected factors: transportation, hours of operation. If I'm working during the day, how do I get my animal to a vet? And maybe it's Dr. A up in T or C. And it often punishes the underserved, because in some areas of the country, what they've done is they've assigned a penalty. If you don't do this, you're going to pay this penalty. On the other hand, you look at PETA, and it says areas with mandatory spay and neuter have a significant reduction in spay neuter, or in intake and in euthanasia. On the issue of studies, and I'm a data nerd. The studies that the ASPCA cites are from 1998 to 2006, 17 years ago. So when I looked at cities and counties who've enacted some form of required spay and neuter, I said, when did they do it? In the last 15 years. So I reached back out to Best Friends and I said, okay, you're saying there's these studies that say this doesn't work. Give me citations. I'm happy to read anything I can get my hands on. They couldn't identify any recent studies, and there's reasons for that. Shelter data differs from one shelter to the other. And if you're going to do a good scientific study, you need data that correlates with each other. Per capita intake and euthanasia decline for a variety of reasons. So you start a required spay and neuter program and your euthanasia goes down. Can you say that there's a correlation there, or is there a cause and effect there? You don't know. Definition of mandatory varies across the community. So again, you're not comparing apples and oranges. Absent any current studies, then what I did is that I said, okay, then let's go and look at some data from these cities and counties who have enacted some form of spay and neuter. So Albuquerque reported to Fox that their live release rate went from 70% to 90% when they required spay and neuter. With COVID complications, she said they slipped back to 80%, but they're trying to get back up to 90%. California, a number of counties report that spay-neuter laws do work. Lake County, they were euthanizing up to 75% of the animals, or dogs, 85% of the cats in 2004, and now it is 20% of the dogs and 25%. Is it because of spay and neuter? Are there other factors in there? These are their data. Denver enacted mandatory spay-neuter in 2019, and they were euthanizing close to 2,700 adoptable animals before. As of this year, and this one blew me away, from January to August, they have euthanized 866 animals compared to our 5,400. But these numbers also aren't without flaws, because I can, not intentionally necessarily, it doesn't need to be malice, but I can manipulate these numbers. I can say, I'm going to have a managed intake program, and if it's a healthy animal, we're just going to leave it on the street. That brings with it a whole host of other issues when we talk about public safety. I may be taking in all very healthy animals, so my euthanasia rates go down, my number looks better. So when I look at this as a data nerd, there isn't an argument to be made that I can stand behind that says it doesn't work. It's just not in the data. So I took care of the elephant in the room, and now Jerry's gonna pick up for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.
Which one? This one? Oh, there. Sorry, I haven't done this before. Okay. Hello, Jerry Wheelis. So Kathy is much better at this than I am, and fortunately she has gone through pretty much everything in general terms. I'm going to go through some of the specifics, and everything that I'm referencing and that Kathy has referenced is also included in the justification document that you all received with your package. So I'm going to talk about first special animal permits. These are major categories that we changed in the ordinance. So special animal permits.
Jerry, we can hear you, but can you talk just a little bit louder, please?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
I have no problem with loudness. Well, it was on special. So what's the backward button? Backspace? Okay. All right. So we established breeder permits, as Kathy alluded to. And the criteria for the breeder permit is that basically they must be an official breeder per the AKC guidelines, not just someone that says I'm breeding animals. And there's a whole slew of things that they need to comply with to be considered an AKC breeder. And we also added a litters permit. So that is basically a backyard breeder, but we've made the litters limited, obviously. Intact companion animal permits. Kathy went through that a little bit. Companion animals are exempt from spay-neuter requirement or that produce a litter without a direct litter permit. It acts as a deterrent. Our position, which has also been concurred by the ASCMV, we have a multi-site permit. So we took away the upper limits of a multi-site permit. It's ineffective, it's unenforceable. People have these animals no matter what. And our position is concurred by the ASCMV. It's that the upper limit is merely an arbitrary limitation and is unnecessary. There's been no scientific studies to identify or to support a limitation on the number of companion animals that can or should reside in a residence, stating the care of the animals in a safe, humane manner outweighed an arbitrary number. A lot of people will point to hoarding. Hoarding is going to happen whether there's a limit or not, because these people have an illness usually, and they don't really care if there's a maximum. So hoarding is not an appropriate reason to institute a limit. So, and there are so many more persons in here that have multiple animals and care for them very well, and I would love for them to continue to be able to do that. Also, we don't want to put a limit on foster animals. There is currently no ordinance regarding that, except for the fact that if an animal is under 4 months old, it doesn't count in your count. But we don't feel that the ASCMV should have to keep track of how many personal animals a person has before they give it a foster animal. So that goes into play with the special animal permit and no upper limit. As Kathy talked about, we also added an intact companion animal permit, which will enable people to get around the spay-neuter requirement. Okay, next. Restraint requirements. This is tethering, trolleying, all of those kind of things that people object to in terms of restraining your animal. Restraining your animal on your property is basically, or putting constraints on restraint is basically unenforceable. In addition to the fact that it's quite detrimental to the dog. It causes aggression when a dog is deprived of social contact. It causes sensory deprivation, and it becomes the norm. Boredom leads to frustration, to anxiety, to agitation, and to aggression. So we made changes to the restraint requirements. We followed the Unchained New Mexico model, which has very limited time span and also shade and water and the width of the collar and all the kinds of things that must be complied with. And to really to educate the public on the downside and what will happen to your animal in the long run if this is a continued practice. I know lots of people work, but they don't want it inside. That's where we can hopefully help to build fences or educate, find a dog sitter, dog walker. There are ways around trolleying and tethering. Okay. Next. Transportation of animals. We added clear requirements for safe, humane transport and clear direction for animal control officers of conditions that constitute a violation, making enforcement easier to accomplish. The ordinance right now is very general in terms of how an animal can be kept in your automobile or truck, especially if it's outside in the bed. And we tightened that up a lot and made it easier for an animal officer to not have to use a discretion, but say, okay, this is what you're doing and this is what you can't do. There's restrictions on sale or transfer of ownerships now into this ordinance. Made changes to include litter and breeding permits that were previously in there. And as I just went through, multiple animal site permits. Okay. Cruelty, neglect, and abandonment prohibitions. These are all new. We felt very strongly, for me especially, it was a no-brainer, excuse me, and because these decline I'll go through first, but in general, most of these type of cruelty and surgical alterations are done just for the aesthetics and the egos of owners, is my personal belief. And it causes tremendous suffering, pain and suffering to an animal. So we prohibit declawing in the ordinance. Declawing, as you know, cuts off the first digit of the finger up to the bone, and it's a horribly mutative surgery, and it amputates the last bone of each toe, which leaves a very painful cavity. And it can result in lifelong impairment for the cat. And also, it affects their nervous system. It can forever. There are many effects that I could go through, but it just causes tremendous, tremendous problems for the cat's health and well-being. Okay, we prohibit now ear cropping, tail docking, and devocalization. The ear cropping and the tail docking, we know, is going to be a hard sell because lots of people like to do it. They claim they show their animals, but they don't, and it's just an ego thing. It's a cosmetic ego procedure. And there's no reason to tail dock other than owner vanity. The risks of long-term problems are greater than any perceived cosmetic benefit. Tails are used for communication, for balance, and it causes chronic pain. There are poor surgery techniques out there that don't allow for proper closing of the incision or enough skin to go over the flap, and tumors can be called. And tail docking is another mutation, and there's no need for it. Ear cropping, basically the same thing. Painful, mutative procedure, which is done purely for cosmetics. As you've probably seen a dog that's been ear cropped, and it usually has to stand up with a frame and then be taped for months. And it affects the dog's hearing, obviously. It affects its communication with other dogs. It's painful, it gets infected, and there's really no need for it. AVMA and AHA don't support it. It's prohibited in the UK for at least a century, and Australia and European countries. Even the dogs that have cropped ears in those countries are not allowed to compete in dog shows. So debarking and devocalization. That's frequently done, obviously, when you don't want your dog to bark. And it's horrible. There are many things that you can try. First of all, there's behavioral therapy, there's medical therapy, and devocalization should only be done as a final alternative before euthanasia. If someone's going to say, this dog will not stop barking, so therefore I'm going to kill it, then if that's the way it is, okay. We'd rather have that than it dying, but there is no real need if you explore, and sure, it's not quick like devocalization, but there are solutions to help your dog. It's not all about the owner. So, okay. Animal fighting. So there is no prohibition in our current ordinance on this, and we felt that that was quite important. So we put a definition in there, we put language in there, and the language is taken pretty much from Albuquerque, and they've had success with it, and it's passed legal, so we felt pretty confident with that, and it's listed in the ordinance. Abandonment, am I still on this slide yet? The current prohibitions for abandonment require that the companion animal be left for 24 hours without providing for its proper feeding and care. However, there's no way to determine whether a companion animal has been left without proper feeding and care for 24 hours. You can't go in the house and check. So there should never be a circumstances, we believe, where a companion animal is left without proper food, proper feeding, and proper care. So we have tightened up and explained further the definitions of abandonment and penalties for abandonment. Permits. We went through this a little bit. We added a guard dog permit. We added a dangerous dog permit. We added a potentially dangerous dog permit. We added a litter permit. We added advertising selling permit, exotic or wild animal permit, and trolley permit. These were added, the language on these was added to help clarify, obviously, what owner guardians are allowed to do with their animals and what they're not allowed to do, and how they will be penalized if they do not comply. All right, the next big one, community cats. We all love community cats. There are so many opinions about community cats. We didn't change a whole lot from what was done a few years ago. We clarified a lot of issues. We clarified the caregiver responsibilities. We removed the contradictory language about registration and permits. We clarified the location where a community cat should be returned after it's been TNR'd, or after it's been TN. Prohibits moving, opening, or altering an animal trap on private property, or from removal or release of any cat in a trap when such trap is labeled with the name of the trapper owner. We don't want someone coming in there and messing around with someone's animal cat that's in a trap. It's just dangerous, and it could hurt them or the cat, especially if it's on private property. They have no cause to. Of course, animal control can always go in and do what they need to do. It clarifies the right of the ASCMV to euthanize a community cat that is injured, diseased, and or suffering. We believe that to reduce euthanasia of adoptable or disabled cats, there needs to be criteria. There is none really too much now. We've kind of added that into the ordinance. If a cat is deaf or a cat is blind or a cat is declawed, that the ASCMV should not release those. It's a sure death sentence, it's a sure suffering, and those kind of cats should not be released. They usually don't if they see it in time, but since everything moves so fast in the TNR process at the ASCMV, sometimes it's not caught. So this just provides a little extra caution for those kinds of circumstances. Our objective is to reduce euthanasia of adoptable or disabled community cats if adoption is through the ASCMV. Kathy touched on the Best Friends and the ASCMV and the ASPCA, and Best Friends believes that cats should not be retained. They should be immediately released or even not picked up. We don't agree with that. We think a cat should try and be adopted. We think that it should be taken in, obviously, for TNR'd and evaluated. And I know the shelter has very, very limited time on this, but as much as possible, see if this is an adoptable cat. The ability to not bring in cats affects intake numbers positively, but it affects community cats negatively. So we do not agree with their stance on that.
Excuse me, Jerry, before you go to this,
Sure.
let's just talk real briefly about community cats.
Sure.
And I'm going to share with you just different experiences that I've had residents call in. So, and that's why I need some clarification on this. So the community cat is obviously someone that, it's a cat that's out there that doesn't necessarily belong to anyone, just
It's a free
kind of
roaming
free
cat.
roaming.
Mhm.
Okay, so I've had reports where some residents will have a small little dog in their yard, and then there's this cat that likes to mess with it. And so are you saying that, 'cause in the past, I think they would give them a trap to trap the cat and then take it off to animal control. So you're suggesting that not be allowed?
No, the opposite. I'm saying that that's what Best Friends says. You should not bring in and trap these animals. We say we don't agree with that you absolutely should.
So why are you sharing?
Why are we what?
Why are you giving us this then? I guess what I'm trying to get is, I'm looking at the time, and we've got an hour and 15 minutes to try
I'll
to
hurry.
get to. No.
I'll hurry.
What I'm trying to get at is when I mentioned this to Kathy, I said, listen, if you've got this great ordinance, share with us what it is you want. Instead of sharing us with what these guys don't.
Because we know that Best Friends has had communications with some of the counselors.
Well, I don't know.
So,
all I know
yeah,
is,
we
what.
So we're just stating,
because,
I'm just stating
you know,
why.
okay, well, that's good to hear, because
Yeah.
I thought you were advocating this, because I'm thinking,
No.
then that takes away from this resident's
Yeah.
right to enjoy their little puppy or
Yeah,
dog.
Best Friends
or-
put out an alert, which you may or may not have seen, promoting this meeting and promoting change. And one of the items that they discussed in that alert was community cats. And we do not agree with some of
Okay,
their
well, I'm sorry.
stances on community cats.
I know I was getting a lot of emails. I just
Yeah.
took it for granted that Kathy had her friends send all that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
she did. You know
I
her.
was like, hi, Kathy. I mean, here I am trying to, okay.
I
Well,
will,
okay,
I
I
will,
got
I
you.
will finish up with community cats,
Okay.
except to let you know that we have also been in talk with the county because they had a provision in their ordinance that was something that we did not like at all and got a lot of pushback. And that was a 2-mile release from the Rio Grande for cats, and that's very dangerous for cats and not necessary. And so we've been in discussion with Mr. Macias and Mary Lou and other members of the county, and we did come to a consensus that that number could be 500 feet. So keep that in mind, that we have some new community cat language associated around that. We didn't put it in here yet because Mary Lou hasn't gotten the sign off yet, but everyone is in agreement with it. So, All right. We'll speed it up. Dangerous or potentially dangerous or vicious dogs. The current ordinance cites reference to state law. It is the opinion of us, animal advocates for change, that the city's ordinance should contain the state language rather than expect residents to find the state provisions. That's pretty much what we did for that. Reclamation. Oh,
Yeah, sorry, I think you're a slide
ahead?
ahead of yourself.
probably.
Perfect.
Okay. So we request in our ordinance that there's required microchip for reclamation. This is reclamation from the shelter, basically. So proof of vaccination, proof of sterilization. The goal is that all animals should be sterilized at the owner's expense prior to reclamation or an intact animal permit obtained. The reality is that surgical limitations at the moment at the ASC MV provide kind of a slowdown on that, but we propose a city-funded vouchers for spay and neuter through SNAP or another source. Penalties. We redid the penalty section of the ordinance to be very specific so that it would be easier to enforce it for courts and for animal control. Also understanding that there is a great need for education in terms of what you can and cannot do with your pet. And all of the penalties are listed, and the justification for it are in the justification summary. Okay. Enforcement. Enforcement is a big one. Am I there? Yeah, okay. Go back one? Why? Kathy wants me to go back one. Okay, you talk about it then.
I had mentioned earlier that we did identify a source of funding that could be used dedicated for spay and neuter. And it goes to a court case with the New Mexico Supreme Court that a municipality has the right to retain the penalty portion of that's being assessed for a violation through municipal court. Counties don't have that option. That will require a change in state law. So the court charges like $38 for court costs. That's the court costs. If they're, let's say it's an abandonment case or an abuse case in which we would expect the court to follow the penalty schedule that's being recommended to be a part of the law. That takes some discretion away from the court. We have it in other ordinances to say, if it is this offense, it is not less than X or Y. That money then, the court still charges its $38 cost for their portion of the penalty, and then that $50 or $100 or $500 in severe abuse case, the city can retain that and put that in a spay-neuter fund. And I thought that was important when we're looking for sources of money that could be used to help people with spay and neuter.
Thank you. Enforcement. Animal control currently has 8 officers.
Can you get a little bit closer to the mic? There you go, thank you.
Animal control currently has 8 officers and 1 supervisor. There has been no change in the number of animal control officers since 2019, but population has grown by 16%. Obviously, there's an inequity there. Animal control should be modeled much like community policing, integrated human and animal services. However, it's not possible with the current staffing and budget. Codes enforcement currently has 14 officers. Animal control, again, as I said, has 8. Codes makes up 4% of the LCPD budget, while animal control only gets 2%. Animal control is predominantly reactive at this point because it is understaffed rather than proactive. We would like to see that change. Not all of new employees need to be officers. They can be assistants. They can be trained to go out in the field and focus on the non-serious offenses, not the bites or the abuse or the neglect, but something like trying to reunite a stray animal with its owner, or outreach and education, and connecting residents to available assistance. and save the officers time for the major things. Okay. Education, 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 or educate, educate, educate. Nothing will succeed or happen without public education. There needs to be constant, not just a one-shot deal. It's crucial to educate the public not only on the ordinance itself, but on best animal practices. Social media blasts, radio and television ads, city web page needs to be updated and should also contain information on what to do in circumstances. Animal control and ASCMV web pages should be updated with information as well. There could be seminars and classes held at schools by appointed persons or by the animal control or by Clint and his staff. Library could house seminars, city conference rooms, etc., on how to be a good pet parent and incorporate the ordinance into that discussion. The courts could require attendance at a class as a first degree of penalty. Most people want to do the right thing if they are shown why and how. Not too much to say about this. There's just a couple of photos from the current animal control webpage, other than it needs work, tactfully. Okay, what we're asking for, Kathy, you want to come up for this too? We of course would like for you to say, everything's perfect, we agree with everything you say, let's just go forward with the draft ordinance as written. We know that's not going to happen. We'd like to discuss it as much as possible today, but what we don't get done, we would love to have another sit down with our organization and whoever you designate, but set a time frame. We can't let it lag. 60 days max. Let's get it done. Provide directions specifically on population management. Direct staff to meet, discuss with us, and work towards consensus within 60 days, and then bring back to council for another discussion. And we are also requesting the mid-year budget adjustment that Kathy brought up for $100,000 for spay-neuter vouchers. So do you have to add? You want to add?
No, I think the population management issue, it needs council's direction on where you want to go and try to get these numbers under control. And the big one is come to the table. I mean, it's been 2 years. We've been coming here for 2 years. We need to engage. We need joint problem solving that doesn't drag on for another 4 years. Our numbers are only going to get worse. Our rescues are inundated. They're exhausted. And I can tell you that if a few of these rescues start to just hang it up, the situation's going to get just much worse. They've tried for decades to get change in the city when it comes to animal welfare. And when I reached out to them when we started this, they said, been there, done that, still have a headache. And so we said, let us see what we can do. But we really, really would like to engage in a dialogue with the affected staff. And that hasn't happened over the last 2 years. Now Gino was present, and this isn't a hit on Gino. Gino's got his plate overflowing over there. There was a meeting with the county, an initial meeting on the buffer zone, and I think he's going to talk about that today with Community Cats, that he was in attendance, and we thank him for fitting that into the schedule. But we need to come up with a plan to have that discussion, set a timeline on it. What we did with Mr. Thacker is he had the ordinance. We said, go through there, put in your comments, your questions, your suggestions. You're the expert in shelters, we're not. And then we could sit down and we could tick through all the things that were just minor adjustments, catches that he got that we missed, and then sit down and spend most of our time. And it didn't take very long to hammer out the things where we may not agree or it may not be fitting within the structure of animal control. So that's a big ask. And then if you would consider a mid-year adjustment so we can start hammering away on spay neuter. We've got the providers lined up, ready to go.
And I'd just like to add that this is urgent. We have a huge problem. Animals are dying unnecessarily. Animals are being abandoned unnecessarily. And please, let's not delay on this. Thank you.
Okay, so this is what I'd like to do, Kathy and Jerry and members of the audience. In keeping with the elephant theme, we're going to try to attack this one bite at a time, okay? So, yeah, the elephant. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to just hold off on any questions just yet, but I'm going to try to do this relatively quick. So you mentioned in the very beginning about the county's ordinance. It seemed like you are okay with it. There could be a few changes, but that you for sure feel that that's better than the city. So my question is, what of those two ordinances that you like for the counties that the cities is, and so that we can at least, now we can't do it here today, but we can at least see if we can bring it up to so that they're very similar or bring that parity, and then at least that change can be sent to council, and then also your request as well. So we do that, and then work on the others as the time comes, because I mean, what you've laid out is a lot of information. It's good information, and I pretty much can support probably just about everything. I needed that clarification on the community cat. But can you share with us just what in the county's ordinance that you really like that you don't like that part of the cities? And you're not going to hurt our feelings either.
He's
okay?
really going to put me on the spot here, aren't you? Well, Mary Lou and I had a brief conversation before the session started today, because she's looking at what we drafted for the city. Our focus when we started was in response to the adoption in 2021 of the new ordinance. So we focused on the city.
Because what I don't want, and then if we do something with the city, then the county's gonna say, well, you know what, ours isn't the same as the city's now. So let's at least get this, and then we can slowly move, kind of like, you know how a crab moves, kind of this, work to the side,
Now you're calling
there
me
you
a
go.
crab.
No, I'm not calling you a crab. I'm just talking about how a crab moves.
Here's what I would like to suggest, and the avenue that we're trying to pursue right now. We don't just look at county or city. We sit down and we look at them both. Mary Lou has looked at the draft we did for the city and says, there's a lot of good stuff in here. We looked at the county. I mean, one of the questions I had, we have a 3 strikes rule for community cats, which is really a 4 strikes rule, because the first time we pick them up, our animal control picks them up, that starts the clock. But after 4 strikes, then that cat can be removed, either put up for adoption, barn cat, or euthanized. And so then my question was, well, what do we do with dogs that are picked up 4 times? The county has great language on that we didn't even catch when we came up with the draft. So my proposal, if this is acceptable, is if Gino and Mary Lou and us continue to work and go through that ordinance, but in fairly expeditious manner, then we have one ordinance. The county has elements in theirs that you don't need. You don't have a lot of livestock in the city limits. And so those get added in. And that way you don't have a difference between the two that's substantive. We dovetail them. That makes sense?
Yes. Now, keep in mind, there's, I believe there still is, and it would be in probably Councilor Flores' district years ago when the city was annexed, there was an area that allowed for still horses to be out in that part of the city. I think it's still zoned that way. So there, it may want to be left in.
Right. No, we left it in. I'm talking about the density of livestock. I remember when I first read the city ordinance and having worked for the city for about 10 years, I said, we have livestock in the city? And then I went and checked it out. I'm like, yeah, we do have small pockets where livestock. So that stays in. But instead of trying to work just on the city ordinance and then go back to the county to do what we're doing right now with the community cat buffers,
Okay.
and the 3 of us, there's 3 entities, sit down and just hammer through that.
Okay, well, I apologize if I caught you off guard. I just thought that you knew what in the counties you liked versus the cities.
If I may add, that Mary Lou has indicated that she's pretty much in support of the majority of our new ordinance, and they are also working, the county is pretty much in agreement to the majority of our proposed ordinance, and we are working with them to make changes based on joint criteria, and she is also looking to change the county's ordinance in accordance with the city. So it is kind of a joint project.
Okay, well, let's do a reverse here. What of the city's ordinance do you not like that you would like to see changed?
Oh, you got 60,
Just, let's.
you have 60 pages of
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Okay, let's start with 5 things. 5 things, your top 5.
Spay neuter,
Okay, wait, okay, let's, okay, first one is spay and neuter, right?
right?
So what is it that you want to see that mandatory?
Make it mandatory,
Okay,
make it
okay.
required with appropriate funding.
Okay,
Okay.
okay. What's the second one?
For me personally, it's the no decline,
No decline, okay.
and all of the other,
Okay.
no decline,
Mhm.
and the rest of the,
So in the city's ordinance, it doesn't mention it then?
no, those are the beauty surgeries, which are mutative to animals in
Okay.
general.
That's a really tough question,
Well,
Mayor.
I'm trying to help here, you know?
I mean, dog fighting's definitely got to be in there.
Dog fighting?
Um,
There's nothing that, I thought that's a state, isn't that a state law that you can't?
There is state language on the books, but, yeah, Gino's, yeah, there is a state law in the book.
Oh.
Um,
Okay, all right. Well, that's another, that's
Yeah.
separate. And we can't take too much from the, unless you're on the microphone, sorry.
I think the enforcement, and that's a big topic.
Okay, how about this one? How about, you wanted some questions on what is adequate shelter? Does it?
Well, those are general standards of care.
Okay, but is that in the city's ordinance that says?
Yes, and
that-
all we've done to that is we've set minimum standards so that as a dog owner, I know what's expected of me. It doesn't just say that, you know, it's appropriate
Okay,
or
so-
it has a roof.
So you're okay with the definition?
With the added language, yeah, I mean, we just cleaned a lot of things up, Mayor.
Okay. And the community cat, is there language in there that you're okay with?
I think the community cat language that we've been working on with Gino and Mary Lou will be very good.
Okay.
I think, you know, the moving of abandonment under cruelty and neglect is critical.
I'm sorry, say that again, please?
Currently, the way that abandonment is described in the ordinance, it's kind of a set-aside, and it says you can't abandon an animal for more than 24 hours. That little dog, that emaciated dog that you saw in the picture was one that was abandoned over at Action Programs for Animals. We don't have to wait 24 hours for that. You leave an animal in that shape, that is cruelty. And so we have put abandonment in with cruelty and neglect and abuse. And that's huge here. And when we talk, when
Okay,
we
I'm
talk
sorry,
about,
wait. So what did you need us to do on that one? To add abandon?
just to prove it the way we've written it in the draft.
Okay, well.
Just take my word for it.
The
Yeah.
draft, the draft has old language in black.
I'm sorry,
strikeout.
I may have the draft, but, I mean, it would have been nice if it'd been,
It was,
printed.
it was-
Well, no, I know, but printed and left, but, you know, some may have it. I didn't get the, so, but nonetheless, I'm just saying, you know, because it's gonna be, I'm just trying to, you know, because there's like, the council probably has, I mean, this is very important, don't get
Yeah.
me wrong, but there's, you know, it's just, so we can keep it moving. The ones that are the ones that you feel are, we need to get done, like, because remember, I only have, I'm not saying it can't continue, but I only have, what,
Yeah.
90 days, less than 90 days here, so. And so I need to just want to move as quick as I can, and.
Well, and I think I think our point, if we bring the parties to the table and that's, we can hammer through it. We can hammer through it and get it done in 60 days. I mean, we can.
Oh,
I don't think there's going to be huge disagreements, and those that are larger, we will reach some kind of consensus, just like we're doing on the community cat buffer zone right now. That wasn't difficult. But we need to get the city to the table, and the city hasn't been at the table
and-
recently.
And what I'm trying to do is I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm working on the agenda for the next 60 days. So the spay and neuter, mandatory, the no decline, add abandonment, I think you said, into.
We moved
animal-
abandonment under cruelty.
Oh, remove the,
Moved it.
move.
Moved
Mayor,
it.
Mayor, can you allow us to ask some questions on some of these
Yeah,
items?
Yeah, well, after they get 2 more,
Okay.
ask them for 5.
When we talk about enforcement, we're not, okay, we're talking about staffing. I mean, 8 officers, and if I remember correctly, we have 55 square miles. That's a stretch. If we also need our animal control officers to be able to walk them down the street, try to reunite pets with their owners, educate the public. Our website basically is not, it still says 2 years later that you require a dog license in the city. It doesn't. So when we talk about enforcement, that's a big one, and that would be one of my top 5. To look at how do we do this? What's the city has, you have your TV station, you have your PIO office. How can we maximize that to help residents when we change an ordinance like this, to let those residents know what the expectations are? People don't know that the ordinance even changed in 21.
Okay.
So that's a big one.
Okay, so I've got spay and neuter, no decline, add abandonment, more staffing and enforcement. That's
And
the
then
5.
the last one would be the restraint requirements. Right now, we have a 2-hour limit for chaining up a dog, tethering a dog.
Okay.
Animal control will tell you they can't sit there for 2 hours to get the proof they need.
All right. Now I'm going to let my colleagues ask some questions, and then we'll continue.
Can I
Thank you.
just
So
say
we have,
one thing? I want to get in the question queue. I'm currently number 3, but I did want to say our city clerk sent the draft ordinance with the red lines on September 28th. I know that's far down in a lot of our emails. Christine, is that something that I can forward to my colleagues right now so everyone has the... Okay, it looked like some of us did not have it, but I just wanted to make sure that that wouldn't violate anything if I forward to all. Thank you. I'll just throw it at the top of your queues so you can look at it while we're talking. Thank you.
So it was Councilor Flores, I guess, was one, and then Councilor Bencomo, and then yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Kathy and Jerry. The question I have is, well, it seems to me you're under, first of all, thank you so much for all your work and your dedication. I really appreciate that.
Yvonne,
Yes.
do you mind if we sit down? It's difficult for Kathy and I to stand
No,
up
go
here.
ahead and sit. Totally, because I have a foot injury myself, so I know after a while it's unbearable. So that's fine. Your ask is adoption of a new ordinance, which includes population management, direct staff to meet to discuss with, and then to have it all done within 60 days, and to have a mid-year budget adjustment of $100,000 dedicated to the service center. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Now, insofar as communication with the public, you could always have the PSAs, public service announcements. I think they're required by the FCC. So you can go to all the outlets that are here. KRWG is also very, especially it's a different population, but you can have those mass going on day in and day out. So, and of course we have our Channel 22. I don't know how many people tune to that, but I do know that people do tune into our local radio stations, and especially KRWG. So that's my 2 cents on that. I think that it would be very difficult because, you know, we served on that, what is it, when we met on Friday afternoons when we had nothing better to do but meet till about whatever. Cassandra said, Mayor Pro Tem said, we only met till about 5 o'clock. To me, it felt like 6 or longer than that sometimes. And that was when David Dollahan was here. That was before COVID. And it seems to me a lot of we haven't, and I'm including myself in that group, haven't made a lot of progress. And I don't know how the city and the county are going to be able to mesh their local ordinances I don't know. I'm not privy to what legal has been doing. I don't think council has been privy, maybe management, administration has. But the 60-day ask, it's good to ask, but I don't know. It's like, wishing for a Mercedes from Santa Claus or
I
something.
believe the 60-day ask, and Kathy can correct me if I'm wrong, is to sit down together, to discuss, to hammer it out, to further the process. It's not to actually have it finished, but just to put a deadline on it so it's not further delayed.
And who would be meeting? Like the
Kathy and
AAS, our service?
Yeah, AAFC, Mary Lou, Gino, and whoever else the council would like to attend.
Would it be our board?
It could be, if you want.
Because there, at the board meetings, we can perhaps, who's the chair? Oh, Manny. We can have a joint meeting, and there'd be no violation of anything, and.
It could include whoever you want.
And then, well, it's you, you're me. I'm just
The-
saying that in order to really get what see, we really don't know firsthand we know that you're working with the county, but we don't know what the county has done. I mean, I've gone through the ordinance that you all sent, or that Christine forwarded to us, and I caught a couple of mistakes, by the way. They were yours, Jerry.
Yeah, probably.
But anyway, I just want to be forthright, and I really, really, really appreciate your efforts. Really.
Like I said, we have been working with Mary Lou from the county side and Gino on our side. already,
Yes, and okay, and I understand that, but Gino hasn't met with us, and I think it's a big onus for either Mary Lou or for Gino. It's a big, It's a big responsibility, or I don't think it's in their job description to talk to the politicians, but thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
If I may, just a brief response. I think the people that we need at the table within the 60-day hopeful reach for the stars deadline are Gino, Mary Lou, and AAFC. Then, once we've gone through, I mean, what we did with Clint, we hammered out in a couple of weeks. It was my understanding, and Gino, correct me if I'm wrong, that not that long ago, you thought you'd have comments done sometime in October. Is that still? If he's got his comments, we sit down and we hammer those out. Before it comes to you is still kind of a hodgepodge of, well, this is the county and this is the city. Let us do that front end work so it doesn't take your time unnecessarily. So what we're asking for is Gino, Mary Lou, a commitment from city management that Gino will be able to have that time to meet with us. And I don't mean hours and hours and hours. It just didn't take hours and hours with Clint to go through.
Well, maybe it didn't take Clint, because he's not the lawyer, but I think that wouldn't, I don't know, Brad and Linda, I mean, I know our legal department is barraged with work. And I'm not saying that this wouldn't be important. I'm just saying that there's just so much, and the legal department would be the one that would be looking at this, and presumably the county's legal department is communicating with Mary Lou. Just a little bit more contrived than just us sitting up here saying, yeah, let's go for it, let's do it. Not that I don't support it. That's not my point. My point is well, it's bureaucracy. But
Well, I guess I'm not explaining this very well, so I apologize. At this juncture, so we've done a whole bunch of research and we've come up with this draft. We need the people who are the experts in the field to say, this isn't gonna work, or yeah, we can do this. And that's Gino and Mary Lou. After that consensus document has come together, then yes, I mean, the ASCMV board or a joint meeting between the city and the county, and always then the next step is to go through legal to make sure that nothing is violating any laws. But at this juncture, Just like when we went with Clint, it's like, he runs the shelter. I go up there, I get very depressed and I leave. He knows the day-to-day operation, so we needed him to say to us, hey, you guys, this isn't gonna work and here's why. And we're like, okay, how do we do this? How do we write this to get to this goal? And it wasn't difficult. We need that from Gino and Mary Lou, just like we're getting it right now on the community cap buffers. Does that make sense?
Understood.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so
I
much,
I
Kathy.
think what we need from you also is just saying, yes, we agree with you, this is important, we want to go forward with this, and some guidance on some of these certain issues.
Well, that's what I was, that's what I was giving you. I was giving you some guidance. I mean, I totally, just being active in the process years ago, I totally understand. I think I can speak for my colleagues, everybody up here. We're all animal lovers. I mean, totally. Cats, dogs, horses, cows, ducks. Oh God. At any rate, yeah, I support it, and I'll do everything I can to make sure that it's processed as not as soon as possible. Well, maybe those are, when you say as soon as possible, that's like a word of warning. Yeah, it's broad, but yes, I do support you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, before I get to Councilor Bencomo, our city attorney has some comments she'd like to make.
Yes, I appreciate everyone understanding that presently the in-house legal counsel office is comprised of 2 attorneys. But nonetheless, we have reviewed the ordinance and we've provided confidential legal advice to the counselors on the recommendation. And so I believe that Gino, who's been referenced repeatedly, is prepared to make some commentary.
Come on down.
Councilor Bencomo, did you want to hear from Gino before you make your questions? Okay. Or ask your questions. Gino? Thank you, Linda.
Come on down.
Good morning, Mayor, City Council. Let me go to my presentation, and I think because of time-wise, I'm going to make this as quickly as possible.
I know everyone's called you Gino, but do you mind just for the record stating your name?
Gino Jimenez, I'm the Animal Control Supervisor for the city. So the current ordinance was approved in October of 2019. It actually took effect January 1st of 2020. Some of the changes that were made from the previous ordinance were the exclusion of the feral cat colony, and it included the community cat provisions, what we see now. It also included wording from the state statute as far as a dangerous dog and potentially dangerous dog. Those were taken word for word from the state statute and put into our ordinance. Another thing that it did was take away licensing, did away with licensing completely and made microchipping the only mandatory form of identification. And then we went to, and some changes here were the nuisance barking, but more or less made it a civil offense or a civil matter between a neighbor and the dog owner, because what we were discovering there was that the majority of our barking complaints are coming out at 11 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning when the officers were off. And when we would come to on duty at 8 o'clock in the morning, there was no more barking. So it was really a misuse of our resources, of our personnel. So we made it more of a civil issue. Now the dream ordinance. Before I go on, I want to say thank you to Kathy and Jerry, because this dream ordinance really showed their passion and their commitment to the animals in our community. It also brought forward something that we can take forward, I should say, as animal control and tweak our ordinance just a little bit, because as our ordinance is written, there are a lot of holes in it, and this dream ordinance did fill those. So a couple of the things that we took from here were the mandatory spay and neuter, the population control. That's one of the focuses that we really, really want to, one of the topics that we really, really want to lean into. And again, the addition of additional language to the community cat section. So as we look into revising our ordinance, some things that we would like to see added. The killing of livestock, taking that from the state statute, word for word, putting it in our ordinance. And Jerry and Kathy brought up a very, very good one, as well as Mary Lou, is also to include the wording of blood sports, dog fighting and cockfighting, taking that word for word from the statute and putting it into our ordinance. A little bit of rewording on the dangerous and potentially dangerous dog statute as it's written. There's one word missing in the current statute that was overlooked, I guess, through legislature, whoever approved it, and that was the actual bite causing death of an animal. It's not in the statute. And all it says is severe injury. So if another dog kills a dog, it's not dangerous. It's only potentially dangerous. So we want to tweak that a little bit so that the killing of another dog is punishable in our ordinance. We want to include the litter permit as well as the mandatory spayed and neutered and the breeding permit to mirror Doña Ana County's ordinances. Mary Lou and I have been in discussion for a long time, and we do our best to make our ordinances mirror each other as well as possible. But what we have to understand is that the county has different requirements and provisions that the city would. Parcels are huge in the county. They're not that big in the city. So we have to amend those certain sections to mirror what we can and cannot do within the city and in the county. Obstacles to the DREAM ordinance. Number one, very wordy. And I see, again, the passion that these ladies brought forward into this document. Totally appreciate that. However, the DREAM ordinance is written more like an SOP right now than an actual ordinance. These are things that I can take back. If we approve certain sections of this DREAM ordinance, take it back through legal, through my administration and everything, and take those words and take those sections and make them enforceable. However, the majority of it is an SOP. This is how we as officers are going to operate. These are how we were going to address these specific issues. Availability of veterinarians. And these are topics, when I was sitting here listening to Jerry and Kathy, I was like, that's what I was supposed to say. So they did it for me. Availability of veterinarians. The added expense to the owners. If we're gonna make mandatory spay and neuter part of our ordinance, how is it going to affect the citizens of this community that are already strapped? How are we going to enforce that without putting an extra burden on those citizens as well? I brought these two slides up next to show you where we are right now as far as animal control. So this is our 3-year stray call comparison. And you can see for the year so far, we're at 4,067 calls for service to address stray animals. If you keep looking at this trend, we are going to exceed our 22 and 21 numbers. So far this year, animal control has responded to 9,621 calls for service. And this one takes up, I believe, like 50% of our call volume. If you have any questions about the slides, please let me know. Here's our community cat graph that we only started taking information or data last year, because by the time that the ordinance was approved and went into effect in January of 20, when we had all the specifics worked out, we were able to finally start taking data in 2022, and this is that graph. So for 2022, we responded to 555 cats in traps. Of those, 2 were community cats that we released. Again, those were cats that never crossed the threshold at the ASCMV, reducing Clint's euthanasia rate. So we helped out that way. So far this year, we are at 526 cats in trap calls, and we've only released 98, I'm sorry. 96. So with that, I will stand for any questions if there are any, or if I can add anything to that.
Thanks, Gino.
You're welcome.
Let me ask Counselor Bencomo and then Graham and Corin if they have any questions on you specifically, and if not, then if you want to be around. So, Counselor Bencomo.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Jimenez, for your presentation as well. I was sort of wondering when that was coming because I was like, oh gosh, this is starting to feel like a very ineffective place to have this conversation, but this is definitely more helpful. I guess most of my questions were around enforceability and how you sort of, because I agree with most of these things. I think, honestly, really the one thing I disagree with, just from my own research, is the mandatory spay-neuter, that those laws disproportionately impact low-income communities and people of color, and so I'm really curious about their actual effectiveness and if it's going to do what we want it to do, which is population control. And from everything I've read, it doesn't seem like that's the case. And but really, just for that, and then everything else, just around the enforceability of some of the issues and how you foresee that.
Yes, ma'am. Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, it's hard to say right now because it's not part of our section. It's not part of our ordinance. So it would be a lot of retraining and training of the officers. How I see it happening is going to be difficult because if we come up to a citizen that does not meet the requirements or has an unaltered animal, and we either educate or we enforce. Initially, I like to tell my officers to educate first because what we want ultimately is voluntary compliance. That's the best result for both parties, for us and the citizen, is voluntary compliance. Now, if it doesn't happen within a specific time period, now we have to go back and enforce. Now, what extra burden are we putting on those people? Absolutely, I get both sides of the story, both sides of the page, but how and what extra burden are we putting on those citizens that don't have the means to alter their animal?
Yeah, and I'm curious, thank you. For the advocates, I am curious about how you see the enforceability. Do you see a $200 fine? Like, what is it that would be the consequence?
I believe I can answer part of that because all of our citations go through municipal court, so the fine could be maximum of $500 and or 90 days in jail. Anything below that is at the judge's discretion.
And what we propose is we take some of that discretion away from the judge. Because people do need to be held accountable. When we're talking about requiring spay and neuter, and that's why I mentioned there are several ways to do this, and that's where we need some direction. The point is not to go out and round up people's dogs and cats.
Or the people themselves.
Or the people. It's how can we best help them do what they're trying to do? I mean, you remember the last time I was before the city and we talked about the SNAP data, that, you know, almost 700 of the people that went through the voucher program with SNAP were city residents, but we don't fund SNAP. So what could we do if we did fund SNAP? If we have, you know, almost 700 people paying $39,000, and these are low-income people. I mean, I felt bad to see them having to pay that amount of money. They're already accessing that. We need some funding to augment that, that we're not going out and whacking somebody upside the head. We're going out and saying, how can we help you?
Yeah. So I actually,
there's lotteries that people can.
So I actually really support that without putting in the law that there is this mandatory thing, that then we have to figure out how to navigate the court system with, right? Or the officers have to navigate. Well, it says it, so now I have to give you a $500 fine. $500 fine I might not be able to pay, and then I'll have a warrant for my arrest, right? So like, how does that actually solve what we're trying to get at? Because I agree with you on the other pieces around, actually we do need to put money behind programs that help people spay and neuter their animals, right? Everyone deserves to have animals, and it shouldn't be a matter of, well, if I'm poor, I shouldn't have a pet, right? And so I think we can get to that without specifying in the ordinance now it's mandatory, because then it adds all of these other layers to the officers and the court. And then my other question, I was interested in some of what you talked about in terms of the data that you all got through the IPRAs with the court, and how many sort of things are going, sort of not being held accountable, right? I wonder if there is more layers. I mean, I'm sure I know there's more layers to the data. I wonder if you sort of dug into them around, was it low-income folks? Was it, like, who were the folks that were coming to court 4 times and not being held accountable? I would be really interested in that, because I actually think it could tell us it could tell us a different side of the story that we might not be seeing, and we might be able to address the issue differently.
And I don't know if the court keeps data on income level of the people coming through the court. I mean, I can ask. I did find last night, I'm going to call Jamie Michaels over at the county. I did find last night a spay and neuter feasibility study formula that the state has been working on, where they look at low income, and they're defining as number of people on Medicaid, and then there's a formula to actually project, given your population size, what are you talking about with the number of animals? What is the cost of that, so that you can actually come up and forecast what requiring spay and neuter would cost in the long run. The other point that and I don't think I made it earlier, and I apologize, is what we've put in the ordinance. What we don't want to happen is what happened with TNR, when, boom, it just went into effect, and Clinton Dock comes in on Monday morning and there's 45 cats in traps. Mm-hmm. So what we've put in there is if we're going to require spay and neuter, there's got to be a phase-in period that's funded, that we get word out to the community, and we have vets lined up like the MASH units to come in on weekends and get it done, so that we can get as many of those done up front before there's an enforcement issue to even have to be addressed. Because you don't want to drop this like a bomb.
I think, and also that part of making it mandatory is that then that no animal will be able to leave the shelter without being spayed or neutered. And that's not a requirement now.
So then that could be its own separate, addition then, right, to the policy. So what I really hope happens after this, because you're right, this has been way far too long. We need to figure something out. I think everyone can agree that there's a problem and that we need to figure it out. I also just want there to be like clear and strong, in good faith communication between the advocates and the city on how we address some of these issues, right? And if the city says, look, that's really unenforceable, that the advocates are willing to hear that, right? I will just say that right now, I will tell you that I'm not in support of making a mandatory ordinance, just from the research that I've done, but I do agree with all of the other pieces you added to the spay and neuter, which is funding programs. So I will say that from my end at least, and that I think it's really, really important to make sure that the folks on the ground are being heard around, like, this is difficult to enforce, right, et cetera, right? So
and that's what we're asking for in the 60 days. Gino, Mary Lou, and us will sit down and let's go through it and use their expertise to tell us, we can't do this, there's no way, and here's why.
Yeah, I really do want it to be in good faith, because I think ultimately we really all do want the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Graham, Councilor Corrin.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all. Supervisor Jimenez, how many ACO positions are currently allocated in the city budget, and how many are currently filled, please?
Mayor, Councilor Graham, I am budgeted for 8 animal control officers and 1 supervisor, and we are completely staffed right now.
Okay, so we are not having trouble recruiting or retaining animal control officers?
No, ma'am, not like we did during COVID. We are
Okay.
good now.
Because when you and I did ride along together, so that situation has changed. So I know I'm asking you to have a crystal ball, but the creation of new positions would be able to be filled based on how things are going now.
Absolutely, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My other question, and I think this is for you, Supervisor Jimenez. So we had referred to penalty money, money that is taken in when people pay fines or penalties, which Ms. Stark, you had advocated for putting into a spay and neuter fund. Am I on the right planet? Okay, awesome. Where does the penalty money currently go?
Mayor, Commissioner Graham, Councilor Graham, that money currently goes into the city's general fund.
Okay, great. Ballpark, how much a year? I guess what I'm asking, is it a substantial amount of money that could make a real dent in the problem that we're talking about?
I have no idea, ma'am. I think that would be a question best answered by municipal court.
Okay, great. If someone, I don't know, Connie or someone could please get follow-up on that funding, that would be amazing. Thank you so much. And then I think the other question I have is for Kathy and Jerry. Obviously, we're talking about, I'm looking also specifically at the mandatory spay-neuter. At least initially, this would lead to a pretty big influx of animals coming into an already very taxed shelter system. And I realize that solutions like this, long-term solutions, take time. How long would you say, what's an average, we institute mandatory spay-neuter, how many years realistically does it take for it to really have that kind of impact that you were citing in how long does it take us to get over the tsunami, you know what I mean, of animals being brought into the shelter system, if that question makes sense?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Graham, I'm not sure that I understand when you're saying animals coming into the shelter.
So what I'm imagining, if we did, let's say we went hard on enforcement and Supervisor Jimenez and the officers are really cracking down, getting a lot of unaltered animals, bringing them into the shelter, where they would not be released unless they were spayed and neutered. And I'm kind of imagining this, when you tell me the numbers that we're seeing, I have this mental picture of 500 animals showing up at. How long does it take for the ordinance to really make a difference? Because I'm sure it's not an instant fix, obviously.
Clint might be able to elaborate on that a little.
Well, and I don't think, we don't want to go out there and hit this hard. And the shelter can't handle that influx of animals. And that's why we're saying there needs to be a protracted period in which we tap in resources. If we have some city funding, use those resources, educate the heck out of people to get that spay-neuter done before there's ever an enforcement arm to that. I mean, if that's 2 years, if that's 3 years, to do that and really ramp up the public education and use vet resources that are available and hopefully fill the position that Clint has before we're ever in enforcement. Because he can't handle that influx. And I don't think that's fair to the residents that have pets to say, starting next November 1st, you have to have your animals spayed and neutered, because it's not possible with the vet resources, it's not possible with the socioeconomic makeup of our community.
Okay, but with a phasing in, we could avoid that kind of worst case scenario situation that I was inelegantly describing. So we are talking about this could be over the course of even a couple of years.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely.
Okay, that's.
And I think that public outreach, that education piece is so important during that period. and tapping into the resources that said they're ready to start helping us next year. It's October already. Next year's around the corner.
Okay.
Can we get that set up? And that needs Clint's help. I mean, we're not the surgical people as to how to make those things work.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Corin, Councilor Beta.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Kathy and Jerry, for working on this so diligently for such a long time. Supervisor Jimenez, thank you for coming to these conversations. My question was sort of similar to Councilor Graham's. Right now, 40-ish, horrifyingly, animals come into the shelter each day as strays or owner released. That's a rough average. I'm curious on average, what percentage of those are unaltered right now? So if you, like on a single day, what proportion of animals, and let's just use this as an estimate of all the relatively uncared for animals in our city, what would you estimate that rate to be?
Clint Thacker, Executive Director of the Animal Service Center. I would probably say close to 90% are not sterilized going to the center.
So I think that this goes to issues of capacity that are intractable. That is, if we said we were going to sterilize all those animals, there would be no surgery for any community organization, any TNR, anything else, correct? Right? That would take up every shelter slot of fixing, probably.
Well, keep in mind that any animal that leaves the center has to be sterilized, or it has to have a voucher purchased for sterilization. So those animals, if they're leaving the center, they are sterilized or purchase the voucher, and that's per law, New Mexico state law.
Adopted.
Or,
You
yeah,
mean,
as
right?
well
Okay.
as adopted. So any animal that leaves the center is sterilized or is going to a rescue organization that will sterilize it, or has a voucher purchased by the owner to sterilize it. So when you say there's going to be a huge influx of animals that are coming into the center and be sterilized, there will not be, because we're already doing it as far as the animals coming in being sterilized.
But those are animals on their way out. I guess part of this would be animals that are coming in that are picked up and going back to their owners within the 3 or 3 day period.
Yeah, and we're currently doing those as well.
Okay.
Return to owners.
So that is already part of the process that's happening.
Yeah, so the mistake that I'm seeing some things is that people are thinking that Geno's officers are going to impound these animals because they're not sterilized and bring them to the center. And I don't think that's the way that we're seeing how the program is going to be run. It's mostly an enforcement program, and that's something we can discuss and talk about. So there's different types of citations that can be used. Like if you come into compliance, then the citation can be destroyed. Or if you show proof of compliance, then you don't need to show to court. Some things like that we can pursue and look into. But as far as being, I do not support mandatory spay and neuter if you're impounding because they're not sterilized. That would, can you imagine the number of animals that coming into the center would just explode. But I am supportive of it as it shows that it does reduce population over time. Any program for spay and neuter, you're looking at a 3 to 5 years until you see some significant results coming from it. And that goes for a community gap program, that goes for mandatory spay and neuter with dogs, etc.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think that's sort of what Councilor Graham was also alluding to, so thank you. And I think that's the philosophical orientation that we're all leaning towards. So I really just want to echo what Councilor Bencomo mentioned, which is I think that this is something that we're committed to. I do think there are opportunities to increase the education end of what animal control officers do. But I just want to name a few things that I think in this conversation, a lot of folks really perhaps don't necessarily have a sense of the balance of what kinds of things animal control is working on. And I think it's very useful to attend animal services board meetings and listen to the animal control folks. But I think in the context of enforcement, I think that, first of all, enforcement that problematizes a certain class of people, whatever they are, it won't pass muster from my perspective. So if it appears that it's going to be punishing poor people, it's not going to be included in any ordinance revision. So that's the very first layer of sort of where I would expect types of enforcement to go. I would also argue that enforcement that increases animals going into the shelter is also problematic. So I think however we work that out, animals going into the shelter contributes to our increased euthanasia. And so I think a lot of folks often email us and say, can you please have someone come and pick up this animal from my neighbor because they aren't treating it well? And sure, I think our worst euthanasia rate this summer was somewhere around 50 or 60% live release rate, very low in terms of what I think our goals are. So I hope that we can continue these conversations and have those two spaces, that is not increasing the population at the shelter through an enforcement mechanism and not stigmatizing folks who are poor, while also I think that education and support are critically important. So I think I'm really intrigued by the idea of having community. I mean, and I know that you all the community steps into spaces where where the limits of enforcement exist. And so I don't want us to rely on that, but I do think that in a lot of ways there are opportunities for us to collaborate more. And I think building the structure within animal control to allow for that sort of coordination, sort of like the TNR coordinator position at the shelter, which is sort of an evolving thing that's really oriented toward community animal control, like making those connections. I would like us to think about investing in those types of, if we were going to invest in staff, adding city staff, I would ask that there be an orientation toward sort of community and education rather than enforcement. So I would hope that would be the kind of investment we can make. But moreover, I just do want to say thank you, and I think that we are here for it, and we do read the emails that you all send us, whether we reply or not. But I think the conversation definitely needs to sort of find a balance between, and I would also ask that in that evaluation, we consider doing things that might not be within our comfort zone, in terms of pushing the state laws to pushing the state law beyond the state laws in places where we can. So I hope that can remain part of the conversation, and that isn't part of shutting it down, just saying the state says this, so therefore we must say that. I think it's possible that we have different models of enforcement and understanding in this area, and I hope that we do that as we move forward in this collaborative conversation. So I would ask us to think better. Our state is very poor in terms of state laws, so that being our best is not good enough, I don't think. And so I think we can do better, and I hope that is still part of that conversation. So that's all that I have, but thank you for clearing up that question, and I appreciate you all very much.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Cran, if I could add something to what you were saying. And Clint, Jerry, and I, and some others have talked for a couple of years about Friends of the Shelter. And at the last ASCMV board meeting, paperwork has been filed. Let's think creatively about that. There's an area by Las Lunas that does sponsor a spay and neuter, where that money would go to the Friends, or whatever its names may be. And if we have these veterinary resources out there, we can help people if they need food to keep that animal out of the shelter. We can do that, and we can build a volunteer base to do that, and look for ways that we're truly trying to help people and their animals before we ever get Gino involved, even though he's a nice guy.
Clint, don't take off just yet. How much does it cost approximately for the spay and neuter, the program to fix an animal?
The veterinarian cost alone is $35 per animal. I want to say it's around $65, and that is staffing, all the expendables that we use, and time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Abeyta, and then Mayor Pro Tem, and then Councillor Flores.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, that was one of my questions. But first, thank you all so much for all the work. Obviously, lots of time, effort, energy, resources were taken to put everything together. So I just want to say thank you for that and for your dedication. I am one of many that has a few animals that are wonderful companions, and I recognize how important it is for us to make sure that their other animals are cared for in our community. One of my questions was going to be about that of the cost of spay and neuter. The question for me, if it is about $65 for the shelter itself, do you know what the price is in the private sector for veterinarians as well, if it's the same or if it differs greatly?
That's a very, very good question. And if Ms. Bencomo can also help me with that too. We did a study when we looked at the cost analysis for the center on offsetting some of our costs to doing public things. And that's the cost we did. The cost was anywhere from, it differs by weight, and it differs by male or female, and also by age. But you're looking anywhere from $400 down to $150, I think was about the spread that we saw. And that was asking, it was about, what, 5-6 veterinarians in the immediate local area.
Okay, thank you. And forgive my lack of knowledge on this, but with the SNAP program then, if we were to put money into that and give out a voucher then, is that something that could be used for both the private sector and for your sector?
Yes, so when we actually have an agreement with SNAP to do a special price with us, it's close to at cost, I believe. I think it's around $75 for that. And the reason why, so they get a what's the word I'm looking for? SNAP gives them a flyer or a voucher, that's it. They get a voucher, and then they can go to where they want to. They like to go to SNAP likes them to go to us because we're cheaper, or I should say more economically there. So their money goes further, but yeah, they can go to any place.
Okay. And does your cost also include, obviously, staff time, supplies? If we are looking at growth in the future, veterinarian costs, we know their cost of service is going up too. So would that all be included?
That price was developed about 3 years ago. So it definitely probably has increased. I can get a current price for you if you'd like, but if we get another veterinarian on, obviously we're gonna have to pay them a lot more than what we paid the veterinarian then. So we can get an updated cost, but that's the best that we have right now. So, but with the price, to answer your question, yes, it would go up.
Okay, thank you. And then my third question, and thank you, Clint, most of these questions are going towards you. We've talked a lot about education. I am happy to hear my colleagues as well talk about education to the public. I know that ASCMV has a bit of a budget for outreach. Mostly I think it's for adoptable animals, but if there's anything, if you could just re-educate me a little bit about what that budget is that you have maybe for whether it's the website or little advertisements that you have.
We do have an advertising budget. It's just over $500,000. No, I'm sorry, just over $50,000. Added a zero. Over $50,000. And we do radio ads, we do print ads, we do all the billboards, all those. Also on Facebook, Instagram, all the social medias. We can draft those or do whatever we want with them. I know we have some graphics on social media right now that talk about spay and neutering, and one of the pictures that was showed here was from our picture that we had. And I mean, we can change for anything. And I mean, for example, is we're changing it in the month of October, our radio ad, to be for our drive-through clinic. So it can be done fairly quickly and completed. We also have some education material in the budget for our community cat program manager. I want to say it's around $5,000. A lot of that is going to printing and purchasing the information so she can leave door hangers and information out in areas that she canvasses.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you all again. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor. Mayor Pro Tem, and then Councilor Flores.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you both for everybody out here. I know you've worked so hard to put this together. And Gino, I appreciate your input as well, Mary Lou. So as a child welfare worker and administrator, kind of referring to laws on, 32-8, I really agree with the fact that we need to have a preamble. We need to have very clear definitions in our ordinance so people understand from the get-go, the definition of abandonment, a definition of community right cats. I think those are all very important in my mind. And I thought that and more specific to the TNR program, I thought that, Gino, you had made mention about this is mostly policy and procedures, that you and animal codes were going to specifically address this in some sort of pamphlet related to the policies and procedures. Has that not happened? That was very clear as we were moving a couple of years ago, that you were going to set out to do that specifically.
Mayor Pro Tem, I don't understand exactly what you're asking.
Well,
I understand what you're asking, except I don't remember that specific.
Okay. I do, and we should probably go back and look at that, because I thought it would be the onus of animal codes to put that together. It was the same, you were very concerned about how wordy it was, and a lot of this was about moving away from putting it in an ordinance and having pamphlets specifically to codes, animal codes, and also the center. And I think we should go back and look at that, because that's something that should already exist. And if it isn't, we should work on it. But I still see it as separate and apart. We should all have policies and procedures that operate specifically, our departments specifically. But I feel like we need to be very clear and communicate effectively with the public about what these definitions mean and sort of moving forward. I am for mandatory spay and neuter. I think it's important that we have that. As someone probably the longest standing counselor on the Animal Services Center, I mean, we've been dealing with this for a really long time, and I knew it was big to do mandatory microchipping, and we haven't made it to that space yet. And I think it's because of the lack of communication that we have to the general population, and finding ways, right, to communicate more effectively. I want to say that I am in agreement to looking at adding more funding for the spay and neuter, but I also want to talk about penalties. Could we not, as counselors, add, I think, those that not only 500, and maybe this is for Linda, $500, up to $500 and 90 days in jail, but couldn't we do other kinds of things more specifically in terms of, that's for the court, but that's our ordinance. We set that as counselors, do we not?
Mayor Pro Tem, that's the maximum we can go.
Yes.
The judge can give it.
But we said that, correct?
Well, no, I think that's state law for municipalities regarding misdemeanors.
But could we add other things like?
I think the judge does stuff like that.
The judge,
Yeah.
it's within his or her discretion.
Mayor Pro
Okay.
Tem, if I may, Jerry, we have put in.
Who's talking?
Jerry. God.
I looked all along the dais.
This
Okay.
is God. We have put in the ordinances different levels of penalties, and most of them are starting with animal control discretion and with education. And so they are variable. It's not just dropping the hammer.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I was hoping that we would, and maybe that would address more like not penalizing poor people, right? That there is some flexibility
Yeah,
in
there
that
is
ordinance.
in
Okay,
there, yeah.
I didn't, can you, if you would give me a page number, that would be appreciative, because I would really like to see that we start sort of at the lowest levels possible and making our way up to $500.
I think the only thing we didn't start low was at animal cruelty and viciousness. I
Okay.
think
Okay.
we kind of went for the max right off there.
I wanted,
Yeah, we'll give you a
Mayor,
page.
yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask about any, in terms of the sort of evidence-based practices or best practices related to stray animals. I'd really like to see for codes specifically, because everybody sees the numbers, right? You're going out, they're already gone. Many years ago, I know that the Animal Services Board spoke of what other ways can we address this and still manage the safety and well-being of, the people and the animals. And I would be interested, has your research indicated any other ways to
Other than
help?
spay neuter?
Well,
Or
meaning for codes to go out, right? Because right now, when they go out, it's like, I think, a misuse of their time when they go out. When you look at the numbers, you're in the thousands where you miss the animals, right? And so I'm interested in hearing more about best practices related to how codes can go out.
From what I understand, and Gino can correct, I think you're probably at about a 50% rate. And there's also, in my opinion, that can't stop, because that one dog could kill that one person. And you can't leave it out. And being outside, they become more aggressive and lots of other personality traits, whatnot. It's also a liability issue for the city. If that dog is not picked up, then you're going to get a big
Well, they're not being
lawsuit.
picked up is my point. I'm
Well,
asking if
50%
you've
of them
come
are,
through the
yeah.
research, what other research is there in terms of best practice? If you can find it, I'd like to have it so I can read it. Gino? Okay, and then, I wanted to move back to the restraint requirements, and how we get around, how do we deal with that? Because Kathy, you said you don't have, COS doesn't have 2 hours to manage, right? To be observing a home where there's a tethered animal, a restrained animal. What are you suggesting there? You said very limited tethering allowed. And you made mention the Unchained New Mexico model.
Right, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem. The Unchained New Mexico effort was through a nonprofit, and they got grants, and they would come to your home. For example, you got a German Shepherd, and they're notorious for going over 4-foot, 5-foot walls. And
Yes,
you're
I
having
know.
trouble
I have a
restraining.
German Shepherd.
You do?
I did,
Oh,
yes.
Good guess on my part, I guess. Again, outreach to that homeowner, looking at that property, what is it do they need? And what funding sources did they have through grants to do that? For example, I'm frequently sending dog owners, it's a great picture, it's very inexpensive, where you take PVC pipes and brackets at the end of your rock wall, and you mount that PVC pipe on like a clothesline wire. So when the dog gets there, it just does this, and it can't go over. I worked with one homeowner whose cat, they wanted their cat being outside, and I keep saying, put the cat inside. It's better for them to be inside. No, they want to be outside, and how we very inexpensively got someone to build wooden slats that lean into the yard. The cat couldn't go out of the yard, but it got to enjoy the backyard. So looking at those, what are those grant funding opportunities? What are those, if we have a Friends of organization, what are those local business people that would sponsor a program that would help people keep that animal in instead of just chaining it to a tree.
I think also too that in terms of actual enforcement, there's a 2-hour provision now that the animal has to be observed for 2 hours. Now, that's never going to happen. So you're going to have an ACO drive by periodically within that 2-hour period, and if he sees an animal tied up, say, 3 or 4 times, you can assume that that animal has been tied up the whole 2 hours.
I mean, the situation, Gino, and we've talked about it. Gino, I'll have an officer go out to the home, it's my home, and that dog's chained up, and I'll say, I just put him out there. The neighbor says it's been there all day, but Gino doesn't have enough to do anything with that because it has to be 2 hours. And so educating dog owners on what that does to an animal and the risks involved in doing that, and then looking at how do we help them restrain the animal on their property.
So
Before we ever get to, we're gonna fine you.
So to clarify, when you talked about limiting, you're still suggesting the 2 hours?
No, it's less than that.
When you talk about restraining requirements? The public says no, but I want to hear from you.
I need to find it.
Because you didn't give specifics. You said very limited tethering allowed.
I'm going the wrong direction here. Right. 1 hour and a 12-hour period.
Okay.
And I apologize, we had a lot of difficulty when we downloaded the document, and now I'm realizing it doesn't have page numbers on it. That's a real
Okay.
pain.
Yeah. No, and then I know there was a lot, I've received several emails about the community cats. There was a lot of dialogue on Nextdoor and other places around community cats and what we have currently and what you are suggesting. Can you just very quickly go over or send it to me to understand what you're wanting? I mean, from allowing people to have community cats specifically in their property and manage it, specifically to, I'm just unclear about that.
Well, there was I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem. There was the issue with the county and the 2-mile rule at the river that we engaged then with Gino and Mary Lou, and I think we've reached consensus. The other issue, and this actually, let's say that I'm a homeowner and my backyard backs up to an unchannelized arroyo, but I own the property, that you cannot release that animal within 150 feet of that arroyo. And as a property owner, do I not have a right to release the cat on my property? Now, where that cat goes, and we've talked about this, where that cat goes, I really can't control. But as a property owner, I have a right to release that cat on my property. That was the other issue on community cats.
Okay, but what about in the inner city? Because we have a lot of problems in, like, District 1, for instance. In fact, I have an issue with cats that are roaming my yard because I think the woman is doing community cat, right, work. And also where the cats have had kittens and we're experiencing all the things you just spoke of, right? So what are you saying for that specific area? And it's a nuisance to me and to many of our neighborhoods, right? Is it continuing to manage the way we're managing today by trapping them, taking them, getting the TNR, right, releasing them back to the area, and then offering folks deterrence? Yes, is that what you're asking? What you're saying is to continue that way?
Yes.
Okay.
But if I could add,
Okay.
I always have some 2 cents to add in. the way that we're doing TNR is not the optimum way to do TNR. And Councilor Flores, you may remember when I came on the task force and I said, what is our goal? And then we talked about, don't roll this out to the whole city. Pick a hot spot, go in there, trap, neuter, return, and control that population so that you don't keep having the kittens. We know that when you go in there and trap and kill, other cats will just move in and they'll have kittens. So what we've effectively done, and I'm grateful for TNR, don't get me wrong, is we're scattering all over the city and we're not having the maximum impact that we could have. We come into your area, and I don't know if you're around Young Park, I got a call about a year ago and they said, all the cats are beating up on this little one and it's friendly and my grandma's holding it and whatever. And so I went down just south of Young Park and I got out of the car and I went, oh my gosh. And I observed the situation and said, no, they're not beating up on her. They're making kittens is what they're doing. So instead of one homeowner in that area, doing TNR with 6 or 8 cats, if we were able to, and right now we're more limited with one vet to be able to go in there and just trap and TNR 80 to 85% of them, you'll see that population stabilize very quickly.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think the way we're doing TNR currently probably needs some tweaking, for sure. We also spoke of, I thought in the ordinance specifically doing some sort of evaluation, and with NMSU, and I know there'd been some work asking a former professor who was doing some of that research for us, and the evaluation component was asked and said, we no longer going to do that. So I don't want us to lose sight of that. I think it's really important that we're able to, as a board and council, give good feedback about how this TNR program is working or not, and tweaking it. And so I don't know if we've given thought about how we're moving in that direction. Gino, have we given thought about that? I'm sure we have, but what is it? And what we're moving, how are we moving on that specific area?
Mr. Mayor, Madam Chair, Mayor Pro Tem, I'm sorry. Let me show you a map that may answer a bit of those questions. So right now, the city's restriction is 150 feet from any city-owned property, daycare, public school, hospital, and such. So what you see here in the green is the current 150-foot barrier. And again, this is taken from just gonna say 10,000 feet. We can always zoom in on it. What the consensus is right now is to move that barrier or that restricted level back out to 500 feet. And I will show you what that looks like if we are looking at 500 feet. Now again, at 10,000 feet, it looks like the whole entire city is covered and there's not very many areas that you can
Gino, can you talk into the mic, please?
that you can release community cats into. But let's now move or zoom in. Let me mark it with the streets. Thank you. And zoom out a little bit more. It takes it a minute for it to populate. There we go. So if we look at this area right here, I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit so we get a better view. So this is the Benavida Center. If we zoom out, so obviously we're going to keep or restrict the release of community cats within the current as green, but we've come to a compromise and pushed that number out to 500, which is the orange. Now, as we zoom out, it allows for community cats to be released anywhere within 2nd Street, Wilson, my glasses are, I need to get an adjustment. Second, third, fourth, Howell. So it actually would allow for community cats to be released within any part of these neighborhoods, staying away from the Benavides Center. Now we zoom out again. As we were working with GIS on developing this map, if you could see where my cursor is right here, this is another city park that would restrict the releasing of these cats. If there's a particular address that anybody would like for me to go to, just.
Gina, we're probably, I want to apologize to staff because I've tried to get you all done by noon so that you all can have something to eat before our 1 o'clock meeting, so we can kind of step it up a little bit. Council doesn't have to eat, but staff needs to. So.
I'm good right there, Mayor, if there's no questions about the map.
I appreciate that. I just want to be clear about what you're proposing as in this particular section, because I do get probably most concerns about the community cats, specifically in impoverished communities, right, where you're allowing for the TNR, right, the cats to go back in and not be given sufficient funding to be able to offer deterrence, particularly to folks. So it is an issue, and it's something that I would like for you all to focus on and work towards. And then I'll just let the public know, and we're really excited about, Clint has had a vision about forming a friends group to the center, and it looks like we're closer to doing that. And I think that and for council who is unfamiliar, this would be a 501c3 that could help with a number of these issues, and I think we should really move on that. And I know Clint is doing that, and I appreciate that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mary. Thank you.
Thanks. Let me just close this out, and let me see if I can get consensus with my colleagues. So I'm just going to take it for granted that when you called it the dream ordinance, was that yours, Kathy? What is the dream ordinance? Is that what you just, yes or no?
Mr. Mayor, City Council, that was Clint's terminology that he attached to
Yeah,
it.
that's okay. Okay, so how about if we do this? We'll call it Gino's ordinance and the dream ordinance, right? And if you can bring back for our next work session, say, for example, Gino, how about you put in red lettering what it is that you have concerns about in the dream ordinance, right? And then if there's something that's not in there, maybe you can add it with a different color, I don't care, blue or orange, whatever. And then that would be something for us to come back to, at least go from there to discuss. A couple things that just popped up in mind as far as funding. Two things. One is businesses always like to be recognized. If there is a way that if you could do, like, say, a bronze, a silver, gold, platinum, say 25, 50, 75, 100, what do you call it? The operations for, and they don't have to do it all at once, but once, there you go. So, and once they get to that certain number, then they get some type of an award. And then once they get to platinum, we'll put those little bricks on somewhere in the animal services so that they can work. They can work. Okay, they can work toward, they can work toward that. Something to think about, just something to think about. And or cannabis money can be used for that too, because it's totally unencumbered. So if that's okay with my colleagues for you to work on that, to bring that back, that at least we can start from there, from that discussion, and then move forward. Good? All right, sounds good. Okay, well, let's go ahead and call for, to adjourn.
So moved by Flores.
Second, Abeda.
Motion made by Councilor Flores, second by Councilor Beta, that we adjourn. Christine?
This is on the motion to adjourn the work session. Councilor Beta?
Yes.
Councilor Graham?
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo?
Yes.
Councilor Cran?
Yes.
Councilor Flores?
Yes.
Councilor Gondeta?
Yes.
Mayor?
Yes. Okay, we're adjourned. It's 12:22 p.m. Thank you. And if it's that easy, we may be able to do it in 30 days. I don't know if you guys can get it done. What do you think?